Hello, and welcome to the Thief in the Empty Room podcast, where Zen meets business in a unique exploration of mindfulness and mental health. Join me, your host, Craig French, as I sit down with artists, entrepreneurs, and Zen teachers to uncover the secrets of expanding creative problem solving, reducing stress, and finding balance in this fast paced world. The name of this podcast is based off of my favorite Zen koan, which is basically a short story or fable used to teach aspiring monks and practitioners. This koan is as follows. A monk asked his teacher, "What concrete thing did the ancestral masters get when they obtained the peaceful state?" The teacher said, "It is like a thief who enters an empty room." This koan is touching on the ultimate state of Buddhist study, which is the recognition that reality exists as it is. It is empty of anything, and there is nothing more or less than reality itself. It's very easy for us to get caught up in our own narratives and storytelling, ideology, opinions, but in the end, the only thing that really truly matters is reality itself, which is sometimes hard to put our finger on. With that being said, today's episode is episode number 7 with Zen teacher and author Ben Connolly. Ben is a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, turned his life around through his Zen practice, and has now been the author of a number of books, including one of my favorite called Inside the Grass Hut, as well as Inside Vasubandhu's Yogacara, a practitioner's guide. And Yogacara is a specific sort of theory, methodology within the Zen world, and it's absolutely fascinating. Ben, in this episode, talks about his addiction and path to recovery, Buddhism as a global practice, and the ability to get distance from one's own emotions. I hope you enjoy this episode. I'm super excited to have Ben Connolly on today. Ben, say hello to the interwebs.
Hello, everybody.
Ben, you are the author of 3 successful Zen books, Inside the Grass Hut, Inside Vasubandhu's Yogacara, and Mindfulness and Intimacy. You also are Soto Zen teacher out of the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center, Minneapolis, Minnesota, I imagine, or thereabouts.
Yeah, that's it.
And I know that, you also are a musician and, you're an avid outdoorsman. Anything you care to share? I'm curious to know, obviously, how you got to this point, right? That's part of what this podcast is about, is people who have already been on the path. What set them on the path? How did they get here? How can this become something that people who are interested in Zen, spirituality, meditation, how could they get a little bit of a nudge in that direction if they need it?
Yeah, well, giving people a nudge is basically the job of a Zen teacher. Function is to help people awaken to their inherent energy for wellness for the whole world. So I'm into it. Anyway, I came to Zen practice principally just because I was I had a lot of problems, mental health problems and just emotional crisis. So I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, and I was able to maintain sobriety for several years, but I was just really not well. One of the really cool things that I got from hanging out with people who are in the addiction recovery community is basically, if something isn't working for you, there's help and you can do something. I'm doing all this and it's helping. I need more help. And so I started looking around, and one of the things I became interested in was meditation, both because, people were talking about it in terms of like the psychological benefits, and then as a way of sort of deepening my what I guess you would call spirituality. Yeah, so I just have the good fortune to live like less than a mile from the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center, and I just walked over there.
What year is this?
Probably like 2002, so about 18 years ago. Yeah, and I just found that meditation I could tell it was helpful quite quickly. And it was really telling because the days when I would maybe do a little meditation at home, and that was cool. But then once a week, I was going every Thursday morning. Amazingly, I started going Thursday mornings to Zazen at the Zen Center 18 years ago, and I've never stopped. The weird thing is, I noticed one day I was sitting around with some folks, and I was like, man, I just had a great day. And this was a group of folks I got together with every Thursday. every Thursday since I started meditating Thursday morning at the Zen Center for an hour,
Yeah.
I say this is the best day I've had in a long time. And I was just sort of put two and two together, and I was like, this just seems to be working. I made a relationship with a teacher there, my teacher, Tim Burkett, who was very supportive. And I made a relationship with the body of teaching of Buddhism, which really, for me, just resonated, I guess is what we say these days, or kind of clicked. There are many things about it I really didn't like. I was raised anti-religious, the sort of ritual aspects and stuff. I was like, but I kind of got into it. now I'm pretty into it.
That's very cool. It's a lot of people, couple of things that just struck me as you were giving that little background is a lot of people I feel like come to Zen with a very similar story in the sense of a little bit anti-religious. And the first time they come to a traditional Zen center, everyone's in robes, not always, but oftentimes. There's sometimes chanting if you come on a ceremony day, and even if not, it depends on the center, of course. But I know for myself, I studied with Brad Warner, and he came back from Tassajara one year wanting to do a service for the first time because we were anti-service for many years.
Mm.
And we all were like, who is this guy? We're not, that's not our thing. That's not our bag, baby. But one of the things that I learned, I'm sure you did too, is that all that preconception and judgment is wrapped up in ego. And once you learn to let go of that and you just embrace the service, the chanting, the practice, the religious aspect of it, whether it kind of makes your skin crawl or not, it starts to do something to the ego. It breaks it down. And I went from being pretty adverse to ceremonies and chanting the Heart Sutra to doing it on my own in the morning when I sit. And now I can do the whole service without the pamphlet or the handbook. Did you have a similar experience with sort of ceremony and growing up anti-religious nature and then finding Zen? It's a little bit of a learning curve, right?
Yeah, yeah, and there's kind of like the way that beats, like Ginsburg and Kerouac were talking about Zen. They tend to really ignore the stricture and the rigor and the religiousness that is characterizes Zen, as I understand it, in Japan and in a lot of places here. And so, yeah, I was like, oh, it's all about freedom. And then you get there and it's like, oh, freedom is going to be found in a different way than I thought. So, yes, I literally left the building. Like, I got up the first time chanting started. The first time I went there, we finished zazen, and they started chanting, and I just like got up and went out the door. I was like, this is
I'm
terrible.
out of here.
Really freaked out. What I want to kind of compliment your commentary on the ego thing is just, so it is true that we're ego bound around ritual, and it can help dissolve ego in that we do things with our bodies with other people. So instead of functioning from like an individualistic mindset, we get to have the experience like a dancer, of just being bodies doing something with shared bodies. Also, there's ritual is deeply cultural. The culture of Zen is very complex in the United States. I mean, the places I'm in tend to be predominantly white people, oftentimes like very educated white people sort of dominate the spaces,
Yeah.
and they're simultaneously trying to make something real that's inclusive, but is true to them, but is upholding this tradition of these Japanese teachers they revere. And there's all different kinds of Zen centers, but I tend to be involved in quite a few of those. And it's quite complex, and it can feel alienating to anyone. And basically, it's just really important for us to all to hold that our cultural backgrounds matter, other people's cultural background matter, and we need to meet people and honor difference.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself how impressive of a job Buddhism has done, in my opinion. And not because there was any plan to do this, but it just happened organically. It started in India, and I'm not going to get every country, but just bear with me, right? It starts in India. Bodhidharma brings it to China. Dogen brings it to Japan. And obviously, there's other people involved in bringing it to different places, but speaking within our Soto Zen sort of lineage for the most part. Shunryu Suzuki, brings it to America. And obviously, it's also ended up in Sri Lanka and Bali and Indonesia and Thailand, of course, Nepal, Burma. Everywhere it's went, it has found a way, not always successfully, different variations of success, right? Whatever success may be. But it has done, in my opinion, a fairly decent job of adapting to the culture that it has been brought to. And I think that's partly why we're seeing a resurgence of Western Buddhism and authors like yourself kind of coming up. The new, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, not regime, that sounds a little bit militaristic. The new wave, in a sense of, especially of American Western Buddhism. And, my teacher, Brad Warner, was one of the original sort of pioneers in that as well. Any thoughts on that? Like, do you agree with me that, because the reason why I thought about that is you were talking about having to be cognizant of other people's cultures and backgrounds, and we have to do a better job of admiring and acknowledging that. At the same time, I think Buddhism has done a good job at least getting into the culture. And then there's probably another layer of reconciliation that we need to do once we get to the culture.
Yeah, it's a complex question. I probably am not studied enough. Syncretism means like when different religions or cultural forms mix. So, like, you get syncretism when you get a bunch of enslaved Africans move to the United States, and there's a bunch of indigenous people, and there's a bunch of people from Europe, and a lot of stuff happens. Complicated things emerge from that. Syncretism is common to all religions as they move throughout the world, but I do think that Buddhism is tends to be particularly syncretic because even in its most root teachings, and in particular in Mahayana teachings, it's saying that we don't have our rituals and our words aren't the ultimate truth. All we're doing is creating a set of words and a framework that are hopefully to produce the possibility of healing and liberation for people. And it has to change. And there's, like, even in the earliest layer in the Pali Canon, there's a thing where these Brahmins come to the Buddha and they say, shouldn't all the teachings be delivered in like classical Sanskrit? It's kind of like saying in the Catholic Church, shouldn't everything be done in Latin? And the Buddha 2,500 years ago said, no, people should be articulating this in their own language. And you see that thematically throughout. Yeah, I mean, it's really wild how different types of Buddhism are. And in particular, this is why I like to be really careful and humble. I'm doing like an event for a big organization next week that's quite diverse. And they've asked me to come, and I'm like, I could talk about Buddhism in general, but the kind of Buddhism I uphold is so different
Yeah,
than
so many
like
different
what.
styles and traditions and lineages and
Yeah. So, there are many people in the world for whom Buddhism is mostly about just, a couple times a year they go to a temple and make some offerings.
yeah.
And the idea that they will be meditating is just weird. And that's cool. So it can be all different. And holding that carefully is really important to me.
What a cool story though you just shared about, the Buddha, because it goes to show you that the founder, the visionary of any group really is the silver line or the thread that runs through the organization, right? So if we literally take Buddha as being the figurehead of Buddhism,
Mm.
he was saying, like you said, 2,500 years ago, that this should be a practice for all people. I love the fact that in his original teachings in the Pali Canon, there's talk of the lay man and the lay woman, the lay practitioner, like he understood back then that not everyone was going to be able to become a monk or a nun and follow him around. And, people were going to have to be the ones providing him and his followers with the rice meal and the milk. Those people could equally participate in the process and in the practice. Again, I mean, to me, that's very forward thinking and very avant-garde in a way, considering how long ago we're talking about. And I think it's partly why there's been, again, I hate to use the word, but why the practice has continued to evolve and be relevant to this day.
Yeah, that rings true. I mean, understanding relationality, finding ways to encourage people that everyone can recognize their own ability wherever they are to do something beneficial. You did a lot of stuff that was shattering of hierarchical norms, although also upheld them. And that's just a really long-standing, very complex thing, like looking at all the things that undermine patriarchy that are in Buddhist doctrine, and then all the systems of patriarchy, or all the like things that undermine hierarchy, and then you have these super hierarchical structures. People remain people. And I'm just reminded by my life and by the teachings that it's like, I've got work to do. We're not all free yet. So let's keep going.
One of the things that when you read sometimes these famous Zen masters, which we'll actually get into next, is A lot of them will say basically on their deathbed, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years of meditation practice of Zazen, the hardest thing, even on your dying day, is this idea of like transcending I, me, ego, manas, to talk, to drop a Yogacara term, which we'll get into. But I think that there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. The human condition, we are inherently attached to, this physical form. And no matter how much meditation we do, no matter how much we chant and how much we pray, I think we still wake up in the morning still thinking, I am me, you are you, and I have my own crap I'm dealing with, and you have yours. And obviously, of course, the meditation and the community, the Sangha, those things all greatly help the human condition, but you're never fully, it's nice to think that maybe we will one day transcend it, but it's a daunting task and one that, might take many lifetimes.
Yeah. Well, people have been working on it for a long time, so it's taken many lifetimes so far, and I'm happy to be a part of it. It's like, what's my life for? I'd like to recognize that yes, human beings, we've done beautiful and amazing things and we've done a lot of harm, and we don't understand why we do most of what we do. This is one of the central theses of Buddhism, where we tend to operate out of habit and we don't have to. So it's like, wow, what if I just slow down enough to be like, oh, yeah, that's not cool. I can just notice that tendency, and instead of acting on it, I can just like, oh, yeah, do I want to interrupt this woman during this meeting? No, that's harmful. I can learn not to do that by practicing. But I have to first start to notice the impulse, and then I have to refrain from action, and then something happens, a change.
I totally agree with you. And speaking of, I do want to just touch on, your lineage and mine a little bit and the synchronicity, but also I just find it fascinating, as I was preparing to speak with you today, there was things that were just bubbling up that I was like, oh, I remember these little dots I was connecting. So just to give people a little bit of a background, your center, if I'm not mistaken, was founded by Dainin Katagiri Roshi, correct?
Yes.
The cool thing about Katagiri is that he was brought over from Japan to help Shunryu Suzuki help found San Francisco Zen Center, correct?
That's my understanding, yeah.
David Chadwick talks about it in the book Crooked Cucumber. I'll just read you a quick little passage. Jean and Suzuki, Shunryu, talked about the monks she'd met who might be suitable to come to America. Her teacher at Eihiji, Sotan Tatsugami Roshi, was open to Westerners, and there was Dainin Katagiri in the international division of Soto headquarters who had been helpful to her. He spoke some English and was interested in going to the States. Some additional language. Dainin Katagiri, I love this. Dainin Katagiri zoomed up the street to Sakoji on the back of a motor scooter, the tail and sleeves of his work robes flying in the air. He held on tightly and grinned in the wind. Suzuki finally had an assistant. The Eihiji trained priest that Gene Ross had found to be so eager to come to the US. Now there was a new shiny-headed, olive-skinned, black and brown robed, friendly, industrious Dharma heir of Buddha serving the Zazen students and the congregation. Katagiri had originally been brought by Bishop Yamada to help out at Zen Shuji in LA, which is a place I have practiced at many times. I just sort of love the synergy because, I've practiced at Zen Shuji. I haven't been to Tassajara yet. It's actually a shame I haven't, because I've been invited there about 8 years in a row now, and I haven't quite made it work yet. Just talk to me a little bit about, Katagiri and what he's meant, obviously, to your Sangha, to your center, to Zen practice in America.
Yeah. So, I've never met Katagiri Roshi or Suzuki Roshi. They had both died long before I started Zen practice. But, many of my friends who practice at the Zen Center, and people all over the country practice with Katagiri, both some of them at San Francisco Zen Center, and then after he was invited and chose to move to Minnesota and founded the Zen Center. And people, many people just have a deep and abiding love and inspiration that's really palpable. That's really cool. And his wife, Tomoe Katagiri, still lives here. So he died in like 92, pretty early, or 94.
He actually died as a fairly young man. I was looking it up, like in his early 60s, which is a little bit sad.
Yeah, yes, he did. But Tomoe is still doing well. And Tomoe actually, so Dining Katagiri came here. He's a Dharma heir. He founded this place. He gave transmission to something like 13 people. Many of them have founded other Zen centers that are thriving. So, it's a substantial lineage with probably their grand heirs and double grand heirs and stuff, great grand heirs, I guess you'd say. So that's really wonderful. And Tomoe is still, she's just living south of town. And she was one of the first people to bring the practice of sewing Zen robes. She was the first person to teach that.
The
Here in the US,
rakusu or the whole robe as well?
the whole thing. This may not be true because I went down to Zensuji. This may be too nerdy for your listeners, but Zensuji is the first Soto Zen temple in the US. So I went down there last year. I was able to practice a bit and meet with the abbot or the teacher. I can't remember his title, and he did not suggest that they were sewing robes there before this. But anyway, she's very early in that, and that's a really big influential practice in the US. We don't have a lot of the traditional, very simple Zen arts being taught here.
Yeah.
And that's expressed, one of the main expressions of it in the United States is sewing. And her book is used by a lot of people. Anyway, she's awesome. She is just a wonderful teacher. So they brought something really cool here to this country, for which I'm deeply, deeply grateful. Anybody who immigrates to another country, it's inspiring.
It's absolutely inspiring. And you just said something. Oh, it was like, because it's something I'm really interested in. I know that you have a little bit of a musicianship background, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So you obviously have a creative bone in your body. The fact that you just mentioned that Zen in America has done a great job of growing the practice, making it more accessible to millions of people. There's Zen centers all over America. But I 100% agree with you that I think that the one thing that has been lost has been the arts, the calligraphy, the sewing, the cooking, a lot of those. I mean, obviously there is a lot of cooking being done across Zen centers. Tenzo is doing the job great. So I don't want to suggest otherwise, but I do agree with you. And I know John Dido Laurie wrote a book called Zen and Creativity and was attempting to sort of do that. But that was interesting. You just mentioned that because I think that's something that could be improved upon, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's a complex question because the impact of Zen sort of philosophy and ideology, and to some degree practice on the art world, I think is really immense. So people like John Cage come to mind, but there's like really great
Herbie Hancock.
Yeah. It's just like, wow. Oh man, I love like listening to Herbie talk about. He has this great story. It was like one day I was playing with Miles Davis. I just played something horrible, and I was just like crushed. I was like, I can't believe I played this horrible chord. And I played the chord, and Miles just took all the notes in the chord and turned it into where we were going and made something amazing and beautiful.
The epitome of improvisation right there, like at its finest.
But anyway, he said afterwards, I said, how did you do that, Miles? And Miles said, you heard a mistake. I just heard what was happening. I don't know how anything could be more Zen than that. But anyway, Miles Davis wasn't thinking about Zen. Regardless, I think one of the things, and I have friends who do amazing calligraphy practice and who are involved in a wide variety of traditional Zen arts in ways that I really admire and support. So it's happening. But one of the really cool things about my understanding, which is very limited, is the idea of a really humble, simple apprenticeship is so foreign to most of the people I know raised in the United States.
Yeah.
Just like, I'm just going to sit down with Tomoe. Mostly what I did is I spent like many, many, many hours sitting next to her doing an incredibly simple task without any instruction. And it was really powerful. That sort of humble, slow, just being in the presence of mode to learning is not highly valued in our culture, that it's about bodies.
That is some deep stuff. And like when I think about it, I'm like, you're so right. It's like, I think that the teacher student relationship in a lot of contexts, I'm not, or boss, employee, employer, people always think they need to be talking, showing, doing. Sometimes all you need is just to be there and just be holding space and be a support. Let the student, let the practitioner make mistakes, you sometimes don't even need to say anything. You could just point and they'll know, oh, I that was the wrong stitch, or, that was the wrong spot. And just by a point, the raise of an eyebrow, and they'll know exactly what you mean. I had no idea our conversation was going to go in this direction. And that's incredible. That's going to stick with me. And then of course, another person that I thought of that I would be remiss to not mention his name in this conversation is Leonard Cohen.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Because I've been going to Mount Baldy Zen Center for 8 years now, twice a year on retreat. And I don't study with Renzaiji, but we use their center. And I become good friends with a few of the monks who are in that community. When I actually went to Leonard Cohen's funeral at Renzaiji when he passed away a number of years ago. And obviously he's left an indelible mark on American Zen and creativity. And so I had to mention that name as well.
Yeah, and you might be there. It's possible there's some listeners who don't know that Leonard Cohen was, I think he was ordained as a monk for a while. He kind of came and went from it, and but also was a devout Jew, I think, through his whole life. So, and definitely made some enduring music.
Oh man, and he wrote Hallelujah at Mount Baldy. I got a lot of love for that man, for that song.
Yeah.
Well, that's all really good stuff, Ben. I want to take a little bit of time, talk about your books. I mean, that's the reason why you and I originally met. It's, for lack of better words, it's given you a lot of credibility sort of in this space, in this industry. I am in the process of trying to write my first one. I can only imagine what it's like. I spoke to Brad Warner. I did a little dokusan with him, and I used my 10 minutes, or actually I think it was about a half hour, that particular session. And I asked him, about some advice on writing my first book, if he could give me any. And he was like, he's like, I've written 8. And every time I sit down to write a new one, it's like, I say to myself, I don't know how I wrote the 7 before. It's like a whole new process. It's a whole new daunting task. I'm sure you could relate to that in some ways. First book that introduced me to you was Inside the Grass Hut, Living Shito's classic Zen poem. This is the book for those who are watching. It's a great book. I feel like you got a lot of really positive reviews and praise for this, because you took a really famous Zen poem that has maybe been traditionally a little bit overlooked or overshadowed by like the Heart Sutra, or something of that nature, and really dove into it. I was telling you earlier before we started recording that when I first met you were doing a little bit of a book tour, and you came by Dogen Sangha Los Angeles was the name of the group at the time. We're now Angel City Zen Center, but you had signed this copy of the book for me. So I always felt a connection to you from that time meeting you, having you sign it. For those people who aren't familiar with Song of the Grass Roof Hermitage, you do a great job. You actually use Taigen Dan Leighton and Kaz Tanahashi's translation. And I don't want to bore people with the entire poem, but the idea is that it's about a monk living in a little grassroots hermitage away from society and alone on top of a mountain. And I am now living in a little tiny house on top of a mountain for the last 2 years. So I could certainly relate a lot to Shitu and to the poem. Yeah, you just do a wonderful job. I highlighted one section that I thought we could touch on, which is, it's good to spend time in places where the things that people have made and manipulated are fewer, and things that have evolved together over the millennia are everywhere we look. Since we developed alongside everything else, it's nice to spend time with our family. Birds, bushes, deer, and insects. Canyons, streams, hills, and plains. It's good to be reminded that all things are related. It's nice to be where we can see more clearly just how beyond our command things really are. We can settle into our mutuality and let go of the illusion of control. It's probably nice sometimes listening to your own writings, right? Like someone else reading it. It's like you probably say to yourself, wow, that's actually a lot nicer than I even remember when I was reading it or writing it.
Yeah, it rings true to like listening to you read that passage, I'm like, yeah, that reflects my beliefs and my experience still. I think I must have written that several years ago. But whoever's hearing this, if you look around, it's very probable there's nothing you can see right now except maybe the sky that wasn't placed there or originally set there by people. Even like for me, there's some trees, but they were planted. And those, present a more natural order. But basically, as I go through my day, 95% or more of the things presented in my consciousness through the senses that I sense are things that were made to preserve my safety and well-being. The thing is, they do it at the expense of other things. The way human beings have organized ourselves in the natural world, in particular now, is at the expense of the rest of the world. Indigenous peoples tend to be quite a bit more harmonious, which is true. Although sometimes there's some tendencies that kind of extractive, but they're just, we're so extreme on this now. So anyway, point being that it's like my consciousness is constantly being flooded by the idea that it's like everything should be controlled just through the senses. And so, yeah, I try and go. Just yesterday, I spent many hours in a state park, just going for a walk, looking at trees, looking at moss, looking at water flowing, just letting that in, because it's an illusion that we're in control.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that actually leads me into something else that I feel a connection to you. Reading your work is I've always been a nature lover. I've been coined the term hippie many times in my life, tree hugger. You bring that element into your writing oftentimes, and you even talk about how you lead a retreat, which you're the only one that I personally know of. I'm pretty tied into the Zen community, and I know a lot of the authors in a lot of different communities. I've spent time at different centers, been practicing for 10 years now. You're the only one I know that has taken like sort of the traditional retreat sort of format and decided to like take it off the cushion in a sense on like a camping hiking expedition. I will join you for one of yours one of these days. I also want to come sit with you at the Minnesota Zen Center, of course, as well. But I just love the fact that not only was your first book that put you on the map an homage in a way to nature and a connection to nature, but you continue to kind of come back to it in your work. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about this retreat that you started, where the inspiration came from, and how you see these two worlds symbiotically, where other people sometimes in our practice who are studying and practicing in centers and urban settings maybe don't see it or forget about it. Or
Well, first, I'd just like to say I'd love to travel with you in the mountains or in the woods, wherever, or the plains or the prairies.
yeah.
Um, the other thing is, I'll say there are actually quite a few people doing it. David Loy and I think a woman named, I think her name is Kriti, together have an Eco Dharma Center in Colorado. I know, like, because I've talked about doing.
You're in the community now.
Yeah. So people will reach out to me. Oh, you're doing that too. So it's happening, and then people do it on their own. But more fundamentally, as you know, it's like all we're doing is reproducing what has been a many thousand-year-old tradition of the earliest Buddhist sanghas. They're just like, we just go into the woods
Yeah.
and wander around, live homelessly, live simply. So
Meditating under trees.
yeah. It's like, well, it's just like, I'm just saying, let's do this thing that people have been doing for a very long time. But it is powerful. There are a lot of things that we can do if we want to care for this planet and all the animals and the plants and the water on it in the infinite future, and actually the unknowable past. In my opinion, there's a lot of different things we can do. Like the stuff of like consuming less, doing political advocacy, all that's really important. But it is central to Buddhist thinking and to mine that transforming the way we view the world is what ultimately makes the change. The reason a massive political shift happens is because people have changed the way they view the world. You couldn't have had the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act in the 60s. The people who had that power and the people of the United States had to agree, or at least some of them had to agree and consent, that the way the United States had been treating Black people was awful.
Yeah.
Now, of course, many people didn't agree and still don't. So that work is ongoing. But the political work is important, and the internal transformative work is important. And so finding time for just you to go and let it in. The other thing is, it's just good for you. it's just good for you. There's all this science saying if
I
you
was
just
going
go.
to ask you if you researched or looked into grounding and earthing and all these different sciences that are coming out, how like literally within seconds of putting your feet in the ground, it could reduce inflammation almost instantly because of the magnetic fields and forces, energy that lives within the core of the earth, going through your feet, up your spine, and out the crown of your head, and instantly making you feel better.
Yeah, I don't, I'm like kind of weak on science, but I definitely, what I've noticed is I read some studies and it seems like there's a lot of commonalities between the health and mental health benefits of mindfulness practice and forest bathing or whatever you want to call it.
I
Just like,
have that book. I love that book.
yeah, it's like, oh, these are kind of similar to me because of my kind of worldview around the primacy of our consciousness informing our experience, which is like that Yogacara stuff you've got on your desk.
We're gonna
Uh,
get to that.
it's like these are things that transform our consciousness in a way that are beneficial so that both we feel better and we feel more connected. And those two interact, and then our behavior can begin to emerge from a healthy, non-neurotic, non-alienated position into one that's like feels good, is motivated by care and compassion, and is motivated by a deep sense of our interdependence.
Yeah, I mean, the word that's coming to mind is like symbiosis. Of course, equanimity is a big word that's thrown around in Buddhism, but I'm thinking of like this, how you're like combining the material human world, the man-made one that you were talking about, incorporating into your practice the natural world. So they're actually working in congruence with one another, as opposed to like this one is doing 95% of the work and the work on you and in your brain, and then the 5% of the time that you take a trip maybe, or you go camping once or twice a year. No, it's like, how do you combine them on a more regular, consistent basis so you're living a more congruent lifestyle that's more connected to where we all are from. It's really powerful stuff. I appreciate you bringing up Yogacara because I'm conscious of time. Ben, when you came out with your second book, Inside Vasubandhu's Yogacara, I lost it. And the reason why is I've already had a guest on this show. Those will hear him. John Graves was actually my first Zen teacher. He was put, oh, you worked with John organizing your visit with us. John was the first one to teach me how to do Zazen. John was the first one to introduce me to the Shinji Shobogenzo. John was the first one to introduce me to living Yogacara, which changed my life, along with Zazen, and other things. But this book changed my life. I've read it 7 times. I still cannot tell you what it means. No, I'm kidding. There's something about Yogacara that just hit me deeply. And I find it fascinating that it's so tied into the Zen tradition, but yet it's still a little bit like underground, to use like a punk rock, sort of, term. And something just registered with me. It just made a lot of sense. It was almost like they were the Buddhist Zen psychologists before there was even a practice of psychology and psychotherapy. And so when you came out with your book, I was just so excited to have another, again, a term I already used on the show, like a layman's version of Yogacara was very exciting to me. So again, for those who are watching, this is Ben's book, A Practitioner's Guide Inside Vasubandhu's Yogacara. If anyone is interested in learning more about Yogacara, there's probably 4 major topics I want to just, if we have time to touch on. But before we get into that, I highlighted and bookmarked something you wrote, and it was partly because you mentioned Sharma Suzuki, who is, someone we both can obviously relate to heavily. Sharma Suzuki uses a metaphor of a movie and a screen to beautifully relate the idea that the 5 senses arise on the root consciousness. What we take to be reality is like a movie, but we are generally unaware that this is a screen. He says, if you want to enjoy the movie, you should know that it is the combination of film and light and white screen, and that the most important thing is to have a plain white screen.
He's pretty good. He's good at taking what people find to be really abstruse and hard to understand and making a really clear metaphor. Yogacara is the way most people know it is Thich Nhat Hanh uses Yogacara language all the time. So Yogacara is the main.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So very common. He has multiple books on Yogacara that are some of his more technical books.
Wow.
He's frequently talking about planting seeds. He emphasizes interdependence. These are strong tendencies of Yogacara.
Yeah.
Thich Nhat Hanh is credited, well, I think he's credited with coining the term engaged Buddhism. Clearly, there's no such thing as non engagement, in my opinion. So, like, no one cannot be engaged because it's interdependence that we live in. In terms of a way of understanding Buddhism that is actively, our practice is one that is actively and acknowledging, engaging in the complex systems that we're in. Yogacara is an excellent, the strongest methodology for this. In terms of your pointing out that it's like psychology, I would say actually pre-Yogacara, the earliest Buddhism is highly psychological. But the
Absolutely.
great thing about Yogacara is it really, really clarifies it. It makes it compact. But what I love about it the most is it integrates it with all the really mystical, non-dual teachings of the Mahayana, because those two actually were sometimes they're like they don't seem to work together very well. And Yogacara is like they can work together. You can really have a clear psychological model that also acknowledges that everything is ultimately unknowable. Everything is out of control. There's just flux. Someone once said it's like the bad news is you falling out of an airplane. The good news is there's no ground. So, anyway, Yogacara kind of holds these two together really well. I'm working on a more Yogacara stuff. It's just really inspiring to me.
Great stuff. Great to hear. Well, so while we're on the Yogacara topic, and again, apologies to people who maybe have heard my episode with John Graves, because it might be a little bit repetitive, but it's always worth repeating. There are four major points I want to try to touch on with you, and we don't have to get to all four, but I think they're the key tenets to Yogacara, if you agree with me. There is the alaya vijnana, there's the manas, there's the seeds, and there's the store consciousness. Now, the alaya vijnana, you could obviously help me explain, but it's tied into seeds and to store consciousness. Because the idea is, and you're more of the expert on this than I am, so I'll pass the mic back over to you, but just to set a little bit of a precedent or a tone, we are constantly planting seeds every moment of our existence, whether we realize it or not. The things that we're consuming, even things that we maybe didn't consume, but our parents and our grandparents and our ancestors consumed. So we are constantly perfuming our own experience in life. That is sort of the idea of the store consciousness, the alaya vijnana, that the Yogacharans believed was another level of our consciousness, essentially. But then on the flip side of that, because there has to be a yin and a yang, there's the manas, which is inherently attached to the inherent I and the ego, and the idea that I am a permanent, fixed, existing kind of human. With that being said, any comments or thoughts on that? I know this is a very esoteric, deep, heavy topic just to kind of just loosely talk about, but we could do our best.
Yeah, so there's two main innovations of Yogacara: the eight consciousnesses model and the three natures. And we probably shouldn't get into the three natures because it's a little hard to talk about in a short time. But eight consciousness, the six consciousness are six aspects of experience would be another way to put it. So consciousness may be a confusing word for people. Another way to think of it would be like experience. That you got sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind. And in this case, mind just means thoughts, emotions, anything that isn't sight, sound, smell, taste, or touch, with one exception. And that exception is manas, which is the sense that you're an I. My guess is that right now you feel like you are a person who is separate from me that's looking at. So there's a sense right now that you have that you are a thing, like an I, a person, a subject viewing objects.
Me.
That's manas. Yeah. So the really weird thing is actually early Buddhism doesn't provide a specific account for this very distinct and important aspect of experience. Sometimes it has, because early Buddhism is very psychologically precise. It's brilliant. Yogacara wants to make this very explicit. It seems in any given moment of experience, for most of us, that there's this, we're like an I that's separate from other things. Now, I'm going to take, I think you're just speaking quickly, but I'm just going to say at one point you said an inherent I. So what the manas isn't is inherent. It's just something that happens to be going on. So just like you happen to be hearing my voice, or you happen to be looking at a screen right now, or there happens to be a siren happening. There also just so happens to be a sense right now that you're an eye observing an object, but they're going to go away sometime. And they might go away while you're what we would normally consider alive, and they might go away after you're not. We just don't know. But it's just an occurrence, just like sun comes up and goes down. So it's a momentary phenomenon. And anyway, then the alaya is just a way of explaining why we have habits. Early Buddhist psychology started to become very focused on momentariness, just saying all you really know is that there's this moment happening. Everything else is a conjecture. So your ideas about the past are inferences, like memories and inferences. And this is well documented by modern neuroscience and stuff. I mean, you have to, they would say your brain, although in Yogacara we're not brain scientists, your brain makes up an image of the past, but it's never exactly right. Memories, and likewise, as you probably have noticed, your imaginations about the future are not always right.
You don't say.
So anyway,
Ah!
early Buddhism is like momentariness. What we know is there's something happening here right now. Let's look at what's happening here right now. This material that we have in this moment is the only place that we can do something liberative, which is the only point of Buddhism, is to figure out how to do something liberative now. That's all going on, but the Yogacarans were like, yeah, but why? Why do I keep having the same emotional tendencies? Why do I keep seeing the same kinds of things? If everything was just momentary, wouldn't it just be like totally different every time and unpredictable? And sometimes it seems like there's some pretty distinct habits. And so the alaya is just a way of explaining that there's something happening, some place or a process by which our habituated ways of viewing the world and feeling about things are happening. And the metaphor that they use, as you said, is of planting seeds. So in any moment, there are hundreds of thousands within each second, seeds being planted. But your mind has to turn them into books. They're not books for an ant or a fly. In this second, your mind is affirming torrent of little cognitions that say, oh, yep, those are books. We know what they are. And so it makes your view of the world very solid, because in every moment you're planting all these affirmations of your previous beliefs around what you're perceiving. Likewise with your emotions, and this is where it's probably most important for us. We have emotional habits. Some kind of thing, stimulus happens within our senses, and then, we feel anxious, or we feel sad, or we feel enraged. And Yogacara wants to say, well, that's suffering. Since we have emotional habits, let's look at ways to care for them. What can we do to be well? And then the really radical position of Buddhism, which has been borne out by my experience, is that one of the most effective things you can possibly do to deal with difficult emotional states is just be deeply and compassionately present with the emotional state itself. And this dissolves, what this does is the previous seed of suffering that's bearing fruit, it's exhausted. It's like it does its ripening. It's like, oh, I made some anger. And then it's the past seed is exhausted and a new seed is planted, which is compassion. And if you just really orient your life to noticing what you feel in any moment with compassion, what will happen is your emotional tendencies to feel afflictive emotions will be diminished, and your capacity to manifest compassion in any moment will be increased. And the world really needs it.
Absolutely. And now actually is a perfect segue into your third book, Mindfulness and Intimacy. Now I have to admit that when I first heard this title and you announced it on social media or, wherever I came across that you had came out the new book, I got excited because along with being a Buddhist practitioner, it's definitely been a bit of a journey for me. So when you first came out with this book, I got a little bit excited because I was like, oh, he's going to get into the juicy stuff. And don't take this personally, but you didn't. You actually specifically talked about it in the book at some point that you were using the word intimacy more the way you just described Yogacara, more from a compassionate standpoint, intimacy with all beings, with all things. And it's really, really beautiful because you kind of cut my delusions, sliced it in half, expecting one thing, I got another. And I highlighted and bookmarked just one line, and you say, sometimes in Zen, we encourage finding no gap between ourselves and what is happening, total intimacy. I don't even know how I came across that line because that could have been like the thesis of your entire book, that one little line, even though it's almost a 200-page book. But just to repeat it again, because it's worth repeating, sometimes in Zen, we encourage finding no gap between ourselves and what is happening, total intimacy. From the author's mouth himself, can you please unpack that a little bit further for myself and for our listeners?
Yeah. When I'm talking about intimacy in this book, I'm basically talking about being aware of the interdependence that's here. So I'm just talking about a natural way of experiencing our lives that sometimes happens and happens to varying degrees. So sometimes we feel deeply connected, we feel deeply engaged, we feel supported, we feel supportive. Those are times when we're seeing reality more clearly
Yeah.
because we're seeing more clearly the intimacy that's already here.
And seeds of compassion are kind of rising.
Yes. And the seeds of conception that are alienating us are lessened. So, on the other hand, sometimes we feel very alienated and cut off, and we feel unsupported, and we feel like we're trying to control. So, that's all normal, and it's cool. In a way, there's two different ways to address this that I'm presenting and that come highlighted in Yogacara. So, the one you're emphasizing this is like in Zen, realizing no gap, which is very different than mindfulness, which mindfulness is like we choose an object and we focus on it. Later Mahayana teachings actually de-emphasize and make fun of this practice because they say if the whole problem is we're not realizing we're already intimate with everything, then why are we going to pick objects out and make them seem more real to ourselves?
It's very subjective in a way.
Both practices, in my opinion, are extremely beneficial. This is why in the book, I think sometimes we emphasize this no gap. We have the capacity to experience a moment where there's not a thing looking at something else. It is a human capacity to not feel like there's an eye looking at an object. In generally speaking, like in Yogacara terms, it'd be like the manas ceases to function, that eye making ceases to function, then there's
Right.
just this without an eye. My tendency is to want to talk about this in less absolute terms and be more like, why don't you look at your experience and notice when you feel more hard and congealed around the self and when you feel less so? Because that matters. It really influences how you feel and how you treat people and how you live. Here, to recognize no gap, a practice like Zazen is when it's taught as shikantaza, objectless meditation. We're not trying to achieve something. There's no gap between us and an attainable goal. We're not picking something out of experience as an object for concentration, which is mindfulness. Here. So we just do no gapness. And it can just happen. And it's very wonderful. By using this language, we evoke it. We evoke a natural capacity we have. A lot of times it helps to do this with tasks. It's easier. Sweeping or cooking. Thich Nhat Hanh is always talking about just doing the thing. You don't not cooking because you want to have the food done, but because you're just there,
Yeah.
fully engaged. But so this is really good. I recommend it so much. But the reason I say sometimes in Zen we recommend doing things with no gap is because we may need a gap. And we may need a gap because we have so much unconscious stuff driving our behavior. So one time you may really need a gap is if you're so overwhelmed by emotions you can't tolerate it. This is not uncommon. So we may need to be like, okay, I'm looking at this anguish and I'm getting a little distance from it.
It's almost like giving yourself a timeout.
Yeah, and giving some space. So you're just noticing the feeling and beginning to bring the feeling into a view as outside of yourself, is viewed. So you actually are making it more separate. That's a helpful part of the process. Now, you may not have to. Sometimes it's like you have the strength, you don't need to do that, but you want to be discerning and get support to figure out when you may need to be like, I really need to make some space around what's going on with my feelings or maybe your thoughts. You just like you may need to be like, I need to be able to see those and be like, oh yeah, that's something that's happening. So we disidentify by using mindfulness. And also you may need this interrelationally. A lot of people who have kind of personal boundary are really important. Actively just being like, now I'm recognizing that I'm me and you're you. I can't control you. That can really help. That actually makes it possible that eventually you can really enter that no gap relationship with the person. But enmeshment is not the same as no gap.
I'm so happy you talked about the word sometimes, because like a koan, I was going to kind of like needle a little bit and say, well, like, what did you mean by the word sometimes? And you actually explained it without me even having to ask, because I think that was a really important word in that passage. Because I did say to myself, it's interesting he said sometimes, because one would think that we're always, no gap is like the goal, to be fully interdependent 24/7, 365 from birth until death. But we are humans, and this is the human condition. We have to be mindful that this is our experience, and sometimes a gap is what's needed.
Oh yeah. And the cool thing is, this is what's so fun about intimacy in Zen literature and interdependence is it's already how things are. So it's too late. If you don't want to be interdependent with anything, it's too late. You're already Buddha. You're already interdependent with the system of climate crisis, patriarchy, and the racism that permeate our culture. We're already in it. So the question is, what are we going to do? What's my practice?
Yeah.
Is it to realize the depth of my connection? Then if I realize I'm overwhelmed or confused by that, maybe I need to step back and use some kind of practice that will enable me like, okay, I can take care of these feelings. I can do some thinking about it. And then we can come back into some more radical intimacy awareness.
Yeah, it's almost like the Diamond Sutra or Indra's Net. It's like, how bright do you want to shine? We're already interdependent of one another and interconnected. How bright do you want to shine? You could close up and just still be interconnected and choose to sort of be in your own little shell, or you could obviously choose to expand your light and reflect everyone else's light, and then good things could essentially happen, which is what you're doing by sharing your readings and your teachings, and your knowledge with everyone who's been reading your literature. So thank you very much for that.
Well, it's I feel really fortunate. I get to do so much stuff that I really value, and then I get to hang out with the most amazing people who are really inquisitive and oriented. The power of orienting yourself towards freeing people from suffering or being free, healing suffering, just that orientation makes a big difference. And being around people who are in that orientation is really inspiring. So I'm very grateful for the milieu in which I find myself moving.
It almost reminds me of like polishing the stone, trying to turn into a mirror. We're never going to turn into anything else other than what we are. But if we polish one another well enough and long enough, we can get a nice little shining glimmer to ourselves that reflects one another in a beautiful sort of reflection, which what more could you really ask for, right?
I don't even know.
Well, Ben, I know you got other things you got to tend to, so I want to thank you very much. Pleasure to chat with you. I'm looking forward to your next book on Yogacara. And I will be putting, in the description when this is posted, all of your socials and websites and links to books, so people who are there listening purchase your books and learn more about your writing. So thank you again for your time. It's much appreciated.
I am very grateful, and I wish all the best for everyone who's part of this in any possible way. Take care. Thanks a lot, Craig.
Take care. If you've made it this far, that means you've listened to the whole podcast. And for that, I want to say thank you. Please feel free to visit my website or social media for more information on my work at Craig Jared French. Until next time.